So I just want to invite you to think about your full extended body, think about your feet, the way you're holding them against the floor. And we're going to do a breathing exercise with me. It's going to be hard if I'm holding the microphone, so I'll try to speak really loudly. You're going to inhale and breathe up halfway, and then exhale and bring your hands together. And you can do it really loudly. And then inhale behind your head up to the ceiling and look up. And then exhale, hands out and down to the floor. All right, we're going to do it again. Inhale halfway. And exhale together to a prayer position. And then up behind your head, up to the ceiling. Inhale. And then exhale everything out down to the floor. It feels so good. And maybe just a third time. Halfway. Oh, this looks really nice. Together. Up to the ceiling. And feel free to look up. And then down to the floor. And feel free to gently stretch your neck and just arrive with me, because we're here together. It's right here, right now, as Fatboy Slim says. And there's no other time. I keep reminding myself I get to be here with you, so I'm present, you're present. And when you feel comfortable, have a seat. Yeah. So I love being an artist and a scientist and somebody that researches a lot and does a lot of work with science and then applies it in really creative ways. So all of these morning's talks have spoken to my heart, because why we do what we do is because we care and we're willing to take some risks and be that creative animal. You can see my logo has 2 birds in the center. I designed it based on Art Nouveau style, and I wanted it to convey a sense of not being alone, but facing out into the world. Like these 2 birds, if you look really closely, they have their wings spread, and it's kind of like the other bird is behind them. So if you ever feel like you're doing something creative and there's nobody like you that's your creative animal, they're out there. And sometimes you find them and you say, hey, do you see what I see? And they're right behind you, and they're doing something else, and they whisper back, yeah, I see you, I hear you. So today we're going to talk a little bit about embodiment, well-being, and wonder. And you'll get to know more about my background through the course of this experience. But no doubt the fact that we're together at the aquarium is perfect. I was saying to Dan, this is a perfect venue because I'm all about immersion, literally and figuratively. So the intention today with this short keynote is to talk about embodiment and how we both elevate and ground, how we lose ourselves and find ourselves, and this idea of wonder and well-being. So as we go, I'm going to invite each of you to have an experience. To have an experience as you're questioning some things, playing them against your own life experience, and to think about technology in the way that we sometimes feel like we're drinking from a fire hose because it's moving so fast. But raise your hand if you're in it for the long run. If you've been working in this industry for a while, and if you feel like, okay, it's exciting now, but I'm always thinking, well, what's life going to be like in 20 years, not just 5? So there's a long game here, and AI is not just a buzzword. In fact, it's been around for decades, and now we're kind of slowly uncovering more about the language and more about the ways we can use it. My background is very much a shapeshifter because I moved around a lot as a child, and I was always in environments that had different languages. I had to get curious and adapt or disappear. So I'm an ambivert, introvert and extrovert, and I learned pretty early on that if I went into the mode of fear, then I would shut down. But if I got into the mode of curious, then I could find out more and learn and integrate. So a lot of what I do involves that environment of how we get creative as our animal selves, and then how we layer with digital technology in a way where we don't lose ourselves in terms of our intention, our soulfulness, and our well-being. So we're going to talk about that. I teach digital well-being at Stanford, and I founded my own company that's an XR design company. So I work a lot with immersive environments and also guiding people in teams to really understand that well-being shouldn't be siloed. It should be the base level that lets our brains become more porous and creative and transformational. So I feel very grateful to be someone who's curious and also loves to express. I've written 4 books, plus some books of poetry in addition. And today we're going to infuse emotion into what we're doing. So as I'm going about all of this example and talking and interacting, I'd love for you to just think about your own life experience and weigh this against it. I started off when I was first working with VR as somebody who worked with the press. So I was with the media, I was covering film festivals, and I was filming with 360. Who else loves 360 cameras? Things like that, yeah. So I was covering as a journalist and asking all those questions, and then trying to give people a feeling that they were really present with me there in the experience. And then I started to discover more. I have a background in programming, and learning about virtual reality and augmented reality and ways to spatially layer became part of what I was really enthusiastic about. But I didn't want it to be all noise, because sometimes the layers of technology can make us feel like we're lost and we don't have our own sense of wellness. So some of the environments I would start to design in VR would look like this. So this is a moon garden space that has water around it. I designed it based on Acadia National Park, but I think it actually looks like the island that we're on right now. So, you know, how do spaces and places allow humans to feel more connected, creative, reflective? And you can be alone, or you can be with other people. And as I was working with immersive tech and looking at that feeling, what it came down to was the emotion of wonder. So what I ended up wanting to prioritize is how humans get into creative states that involve wonder and awe. Because usually if you're in a feeling of wonder, you have a loss of attachment to a fixed identity, to space and time, and you feel a certain sense of not just freedom, but also a dropping in of creativity that some people call flow state. So even right now as I'm describing it, my voice starts to slow down, I get really into it. So I wanted to look at XR and how we use it as the perfect place to prime for these types of experiences. I started to research more about wonder and awe, some of the history from people like William James, some of the conditions that would create the awe state. And when I wrote a book during the pandemic that was all about awe and wonder, I ended up having the book celebration inside of a spatial environment. And it was perfect because everybody could share, they could connect, and I was standing on this giant book and had this surreal feeling of seeing all of my friends and collaborators around me. So I'm currently curious about our mirror neurons and how much they fire when we're in creative environments mediated by XR. So a lot of what I've been working with is not denying the physicality of our bodies. So not saying, some people ask me, is your work escapism? Who else has heard that? Like, you work with XR and is it disappearing into the matrix? Yeah, so we get that question sometimes, and I say, no, not at all. It's about the primary layer being physical, and in my mind, the more we get into understanding the science behind spatial layering, we can layer with intention. And then you start to see all the possibilities for augmented reality, for virtual reality, because our spatial bodies and our biological hardware, I don't think are changing. I'm curious, you know, everything I say is not static, but I feel in my senses like we have a lot to take in from our physical primary senses. And then as we start to layer on with technology, if we can keep that in mind, then we start to become more embodied. We start to become more three-dimensional. And perhaps we've been living in the most awkward time to be human, where most of the tech previously was mediated by 2D screens, and we're 3D creatures. So no wonder as we move towards spatial computing, it really is a time for us to think about our three-dimensional selves and get back to this state of wonder and awe. So as I was writing the current book that just came out called Digital Wellbeing, I moved from all of that research in wonder to starting to teach at Stanford, the course Digital Wellbeing. infusing spatial computing. Students would come in really curious because it's an elective, so they're either, they can be any kind of discipline. I'll have students in CS who come in and they want to code an app for well-being, or I'll have some students that are in the nursing school or the med school and they're working on well-being and health cases. And as we start to discuss spatial computing, I say, use yourself as the first primary test case. How does it feel? We come in together, and in groups we do all of these exercises where you have an experience. And I just want to ask you right now to think about a meaningful experience in your life. And if you think about anything that was meaningful, the panel used the word meaningful, and I loved it when I heard it this morning. Usually it involves some form of emotion. So in AI-driven spatial computing, as we're thinking about what's salient for the brain, what's memorable, it's firing an experience that also has emotion, infusion of emotion. Everything that matters, that we love to play with, has that encodement. So learning how to engage. I'm originally from Boston. We were talking last night about the Media Lab and Seymour Papert and the history of lifelong kindergarten. So how can we build more experiences that are based on those 4 Ps of projects and passion and peers and play? We like to play. I'm curious and seeing a lot of entrainment happening, whether we know it or not. And entrainment is that notion of following along. Like right now, our bodies are kind of practicing an entrainment with each other. We're starting to synchronize a little bit. Sometimes when you have an experience and there's music in the background, you'll start moving to that music. And that can have a lot of well-being underneath it. It can also involve us feeling something as a collective. So these future AI-driven spatial computing themes, they all happen to start with the letter E, because I was seeing curiously that there's a lot happening that involve the expression, involve the embodiment. And XR is the perfect vehicle. So no wonder it's like projects and passion meet that purpose. Form fits function, and you're inside an XR environment and anything's possible. So again, fast forward 4 years later, now, just maybe 3 weeks ago, my book, Digital Wellbeing, based on some of the coursework that I developed at Stanford and then also additional research and work for the past year, it came out in Physicality. And I said, there's no better way to celebrate that than going into VR in a social group and having a share, having people from all over the world able to access and practicing these embodiment exercises that involve spatial layering. So we started together on a call, and then we moved into metaverse space. And you just feel this kind of sense of possibility and also breaking the expectations. We don't want to use our technology for replicating what has been. We want to use it toward building what could be. And so people sometimes ask me, just to name it, digital well-being is a buzzword. And so they'll ask me, well, what do you mean by that? What does well-being actually mean in a digital age? And I'll say, well, my interpretations are not prescriptive. They're invitational. And some of the research involves this notion of a dynamic construct. If you want to ask me, what are the top 5 things that I should do right now for better digital well-being? I can give you ideas, but I'm not going to tell you, oh, you do this, you check off that checkbox, because we're not made like robots. And each of us has a different type of personality, different conditions, different life conditions, families, obligations, but I can tell you some things to try and test out and let you see, using your life experience, what fits really well for you. And that's why I'm really interested in leaning into the dynamism and looking at how digital well-being plays out in the next 5 to 10 years. So just to point out, in this book that just came out, there are all of these facets and all of these different practices that are in the different chapters, and I framed it like beads on a necklace. So you could start in any place in the book. You don't have to start right at the beginning. In fact, I'm really excited in chapter 8, part of the research involved Rodney Mullen, the skateboarder, and we were talking about our body sense and also that physical three-dimensional body sense moving into XR spaces and how we do have an intrinsic flow state. How do we access it? there are many inroads, but I love the sports practices that athletes use that also have proprioception, the ability to see ourselves in place and time as three-dimensional beings and predict where we'll be in the future. So I just want to make this accessible. I can talk with you. If you're curious about the book, it did just come out. And I'm having a lot of gatherings and events. So in the next few weeks, there'll be meetups, whether it's in spatial or in person. There's a lot happening with different forms of interactions. And I also produce a newsletter. So monthly, I'll be sharing some of the research and things that happen. And I just feel like right now, a lot of people are talking about AI and saying, you know, oh, it's the time to get on board, like it's a buzzword, and it is. And it's time to embrace that and also see the wonder in this present moment, like we did right at the beginning, or that we're here in this beautiful location. You know, as you're riding here, colors of the leaves, the sounds, the sights around you. Part of my experiences with awe and wonder are not always the explosions and the fireworks, but recognizing the deep awe in this now moment. You know, how can we take ordinary moments and make them more extraordinary by tuning our awareness? So I'm encouraging a lot of people to just practice simple exercises like looking up. It lets us be better designers when we're designing for XR if we have practices with spatial, being aware of ourselves in 3D environments. And as we think about the emotion of awe and wonder, and particularly awe, which doesn't get talked about a lot, and if we look back through religious text, it's associated with fear a lot instead of this all-present kind of emotion. And so when we think about the awe of our modern interpretations, I'm encouraging a lot of people to embrace that we as humans are meant to be social and meant to be in a collective. Many people say now that they meditate alone or they have a practice where they go alone, and that's wonderful, that's very soulful. You can also have a collective experience in awe just being together. Right now, we could be experiencing an awe moment. Emil Durkheim coined the phrase collective effervescence as that form of awe that you get when you're firing off of each other and you're aware of that collective. You could be cheering together, you could be dancing. Humans need rituals. So part of our practice coming together in an event is to practice that shared awe experience. And for me, I love deep sea diving. I love floating and just being like a fish. I don't know if anyone else has that practice where you just let your mind go and you wander and you wonder. To be present doesn't have to mean being so focused and so fixed on a topic. And I think that's another kind of learning I've had over the years, that I used to think it was just about harnessing a monkey mind where things were moving around too fast. And then I discovered, well, actually, it's a little more like moving through a practice. That's totally okay. That was just another kind of floating experience with kelp, because sometimes what I do is I follow along and let myself go, and then that's when the creative idea drops in. So a lot of the practices that I share are also in the book, where I tell people throughout history, humans have had this tradition, and now we can use places like XR worlds to encourage us to lose ourselves and get more into that awe state. And I just want to point out, too, that there's a method. There are foundational frameworks, and part of what I'm questioning is how societies operate better, how communities operate better. So in my background with teaching and learning and guiding from child to adult, it's like we're all kids. Some of us are in bigger bodies, different ages. If we don't start with a culture cornerstone of dignity, which represents the earth, then people can't move into a freedom state of feeling free to explore. The freedom state then would move into imagination, where people come up with creative ideas. That would die and not have any application if it weren't given agency. So in my experiences as an educator, as a collaborator, I try to pay attention to those four cornerstones as I'm designing experiences for groups, because then people who have more agency are going to circle back and say to other people, well, how can I treat you with dignity so that you have a choice of how you want to operate and be creative on a team? So a lot of this is underneath the framework of how you build an experience with curiosity, with connection, with hope, and with joy. Because if we prioritize joy and wonder and awe, then amazing experiences are going to come from there. So I just want to thank you and encourage you today as you're doing things, like maybe you're going to be out on a boat, maybe you're going to be building a terrarium, but as you're doing something, just pay attention to your animal body and your animal sensibility and see what comes up for you. And then as we layer with tech, let's use each other for our curiosity and our learning, and just worlds start to open from there. So thank you for this community. I'd love to talk individually with each of you, and wishing you a great journey from here on. Thank you, team. Thank you, Frontier.